Welcome back. Today I'm going to try to solve some chess puzzles. I'm going to go back to the random puzzles where my rating is generated on chess.com and try to push my rating just a little bit higher. Hopefully you'll get something out of this, whether you're lower rated than me or higher rated than me. Either way, if you see something that I missed or understand something that I don't, feel free to let me know in the comments. Hopefully, as I talk through my thought process, that might help some of you as well. Let's go. I've already pulled up this puzzle page before I did the intro to this video, and it's sitting here waiting for me. I did that by accident. So the time has already ticked off. So let's see what I can do here. I am playing with the black pieces. I do have a couple of checks, or just one. Looks like I have one check in this position. I don't think that's any good, but I'm going to consider it just in case. I do know that a lot of puzzles begin with a queen sacrifice or a sacrifice of some kind. If I do check on b2 and the king takes, which I think it has to, I would have a follow-up check by bringing my rook over to b5, but then I think the king could just sidestep either way, or back where it was for that matter, and I don't think I would have a good follow-up there. Let's look at captures besides that one. I do have a couple of captures. One is this d takes c3, which would protect that check. Wouldn't quite be mate at that point because the other player gets a turn after I capture c3. So for example, they could capture this rook, or they could take back, I suppose. I don't know exactly what they would do. Let's think about that capture first, because it does threaten a checkmate on b2. So they would definitely have to do something, but what would they do? They could bring up the rook to guard that spot. In that case, I think I could just take it, and then I would again be threatening mate with my queen on b2. What else could they do? They could take my rook, which is what I would expect a normal opponent to do. But in that case, then I would have almost mate. By capturing here, they would have to move the king over, and then I would take that rook there, and that would be check again. They would have to move the king over again, and then I think I could come after it one way or another. But what else could they do? I think taking back would be probably their best option. Probably, but I'm not certain. Also, their queen would be lined up with that spot. I just noticed that. So maybe that's not good at all, because their queen would just capture back, and then their queen is guarding that spot on b2. What about simply, let's see, are there any other captures before I move on? No. So I'm going to move on to threats. I'm going to keep this in mind just in case, because even if their queen captured, I could follow up with something like this. They could take back, then I could check again, then they would have to take back with their king. I think they wouldn't have to, they could get out, but then I would have a follow-up check down there. But I think we've just traded off two rooks for two rooks at that point. So threats. One threat I think would be pushing this pawn forward, because it's threatening a check protected by two rooks on the next turn. It also, I guess, threatens a mate there after two more moves. What could they do about that, or what would they do in that situation? That doesn't seem like that big of a threat because it's so far off. I have another threat, which is dropping this rook back to d7, threatening their queen. But their queen could very easily get out of that, just to one of those three spots, or further, anywhere along the g-file. Not seeing much else. Do I have like a discovered attack or something like that? I mean, this is technically a discovered attack because my rook is pointing at their rook, but it's also opening up the discovered attack on me, which again, if they did that, if they did take there, then I would have mate on b2. So that's looking more and more like my best option, just because it does discover this attack. However, I think their queen just takes. But either way, either the pawn or the queen, what would I have there? Let's say their queen captures on c3, retakes the pawn, and our rooks are still facing each other. I just don't see anything progressing from there. This threat, I just noticed something else that it does. It opens the path for my queen along this dark square diagonal to here on e3, which would be a check. So I don't know what they would do there, but they definitely would get a turn. They might see this check coming, and I don't know, move a rook over to stop it. But if they did that, then I would push my pawn. If they moved this rook over to guard the e3 square, I would push the pawn one more square forward, which would be a fork on their rook and king. What could they do then to guard against that check? And how dangerous is that check, for that matter? For that matter, they could bring their king here to guard that square. And then what would I have? Oh, if they brought their king to protect the square, then I could take b2 with check, and they have to vacate that square. Then I could push the pawn forward again. What else can they do there if I move that pawn? That's looking more and more like my best option, but I've now spent 6 minutes discussing this option, so I'm just going to do it. Okay, that was wrong. We're going to click the hint button and see what I should have done. I should have taken. Okay, well, let's see what would have happened had I taken. Their queen would have taken. That's what I said. And then take the rook. Oh, no, I'm in check. Oh, I didn't see that. Now I'm in check again, so I have to take. And they've lost their queen. Wow, go back to the beginning. I thought their queen would take, but I didn't realize that when their queen took, it would be check. And that I could then block with the rook, which pins their queen to their king. We learned something. Okay, and then I take this with my king, because if I take with my queen, then that rook's no longer defended. I suppose there at the end they could have brought their rook over for another check, but I would have just gotten out of it. Well, I lost a bunch of points for that. I lost 16 points for that puzzle. Playing with the black pieces. I do have some checks. I have a protected check on e3, but their king just moves over. I think obviously I have this check here too on f2, but again, their king just moves over, or they could take. I don't know that they would take, but they could. But how bad would it be if they just moved over? I think if they just moved over, I wouldn't have gained anything. Also, their queen is back here also guarding that square. They have 2 pieces guarding that square besides the king. So it would either just give up a bishop or be a wasted move because the king could just get out. I have also this check, which would win the knight, I think, because it's a fork. That looks pretty good, just winning a piece. If I check here, they could block, but they probably don't want to because of bishops and whatnot. Or for that matter, the queen could go there. So I don't think they would block. If I checked from b6, I think they would just move. Then I could take the knight, because I wouldn't take with the rook. This is why I wouldn't take with the rook after they moved out of check, because if I took with the rook, they would capture here and that would be mate. I need this rook. I need the 2 rooks to be guarding each other as long as that queen is there. So check, king moves out of check. I take the knight with my queen, and then I'm a piece ahead. And their queen is under fire at that point. If they decided to trade, then I could take with my rook because then this rook wouldn't be under fire anymore. And I would still have 2 rooks and a bishop, and they would just have 2 rooks. So I'm going to try that. Oh, that was it. And then, oh, and they did take. Okay, then I don't have a check, so I think it only makes sense to take. All right, well, I got 5 of my 16 points back. Let's keep going. Okay, checks is the first thing I will look for. I do have a check, 2 different checks with the bishop. My light squared bishop can check on a4, sorry, but they would just block that, I think, with the pawn, which would be protected by their other pawn and their knight. With the light squared bishop, I can also check down here on e2, but they have 1, 2, 3 pieces guarding that square. The last check that I see is rook to h1. I almost said a1, but rook to h1 check does what? Their king can't come out this way because of my light squared bishop. Can't come out this way because of my knight there in the corner, which appears to have been trapped after capturing a rook. So the king would be forced, because they can't block that check either, the king would be forced to move up to d2. Okay, so that's a 1 move, only legal move. So I like that. Rook to h1, king has to go to d2. What follow-up checks would I have at that point? I would have the check with the knight, but the pawn would just take, so I could check again with the bishop, I guess. Would that be the only follow-up check? Would be bishop to e1? I mean, obviously the king over to d1, but then they would just take it with the king. I don't think bishop to e3 makes any sense because the king would just capture it. And then I would have the follow-up check with the knight, but then the king would just go back. So I think after the king moved up, I could check on e1 with the bishop. And because my light squared bishop's cutting off these squares, my rook would be protecting that. The dark squared bishop would be hitting these, and my knight's hitting there. That's also an only mover, so I do like that one. The king then has to come out to e3. Would not have a follow-up check with either bishop at that point, or a good one with the rook, but I would have the follow-up check with the knight, which drives the king further out. And from there, the knight would be hitting these two squares. The bishops are still covering all those other ones. So the king could not come forward because my pawns are guarding there. So there would be another only move. Then what? I would have a check with the pawn or a follow-up check with the knight. No, their pawn guards that square. Or with the rook here. I'm just going to try it. That's too many moves, but that's what I'm going to try. Oh, that was it. Okay, then the only check that made sense to me at this point was bishop to e1. I went through all the possibilities. Nothing else looked good. I think I went through all the possibilities. So that's what I'm going to try. Okay. Then after that, I said knight to here because my bishops are cutting off all of these squares. My pawns are cutting off these squares and that one. So that's going to, when I check with my knight, it's going to force them over here. I don't think there's anything better than that. Now again, bishop's cutting off this and these. Knight's cutting off here, pawns cutting off these. So my next check, the king's going to have to go there. But what is going to make that check? No, because if I check with the pawn, the king can come forward. I can't check with the bishop because it would just get taken. If I check with the rook, the king has to go there. Then I would have a follow-up check with the knight, and the king would have to go to the side, one of those two places. Okay, so it's either the rook or the pawn. It's not the knight. If I check with the knight, they just take with the pawn there. This is a long one, but I can tell that it's forcing, and that's what I'm working on. Bishop's cutting off these, knight's cutting off these, pawn's cutting off these. So, and I don't want to check here with my rook on h3 because their bishop guards that. So let's say rook to f1 check. That forces the king to g2. I would have a follow-up check with my knight, and the rook would be cutting off these. The knight would be cutting off there. That would force the king to one of those two squares. I'm going to say it's the rook again. It was the rook again. Oh my goodness, this one is long. All right. Wait, what about this? No, that just forces the king back down. It's got to be the knight check, right? Okay, let's see. My dark squared bishop's hitting these. My rook is hitting these. From e3, my knight would hit that square and this one, giving the king two options, h2 and h3. If it went to h2, I guess I could take the bishop, but then their rook would take back. If it went to h3, okay. Maybe I got it. Maybe I got it. Okay. Rook's hitting this, bishop's hitting these. Rook's also hitting that. Okay. So knight check on e3. If the king goes to h3, I think rook to the corner would be mate because the knight would be hitting that square and the bishop's cutting off everything else and the rook's cutting off the whole h-file. So if it goes to h3, rook in the corner is mate. So what if it goes to h2? Knight to e3 check. King goes to h2. Then I can't check in the corner with my rook, although the rook is cutting off those squares. So king to h2. What do I do if the king goes to h2? I guess I could bring my rook up to f2, but then the king can go either way or to g1. Wow, okay. Maybe I shouldn't have started a puzzle video, but I've gotten all the moves right so far, but I feel like I'm going to lose on this one, but it has to be that knight check, right? Oh, and it stopped there. What? I was worried about the next move. Okay, I'm going to hit the analysis board because I don't know what the next move would have been. Okay, I got all the way here by simple logic. And it's, okay, king to h2 was definitely best because king to h3 gives me mate in the corner. Okay, so what would I do then after king to h2? Oh, that's the reason the puzzle didn't continue is because I have several moves. Well, I have two moves that are about the same. One was the one I considered, which was checking on rook to f2, but that gives the king options. And that would give the king these options or that option. And the other would be knight captures g4, but then the rook would take back. Oh, but then I would get the other bishop, so I'd get two bishops for the knight. That's why it stopped. I get it now. All right. Well, I've gotten 2 in a row, and I'm 10 points closer to the 16 that I lost. Okay, so I've got 6 more points just to get to my starting point of this session. All right. Well, that rook came down there fast and furious, but did it make a mistake? Do I have that? No, I don't have that because their rook would then just go back. I have 2 different checks with the dark squared bishop. One looks like it just gives up the bishop. But let's follow them out. If I check on g5 with my dark squared bishop, the king could just move over either way. Now, if it moved over to this file where the rook is, to the d file, I don't know. I don't know what I would do then. I don't think that's it. because it just moves out of the way and I don't have a good follow-up. Okay, what about bishop captures b2? The king could take it, doesn't have to, but if it did, I could follow with this check, but then it could just go back, and then I could follow with this check, and then it could come out, and then I would have nothing. But maybe it's not one of the checks. Maybe it's a threat of some kind. I do have queen captures a2, which threatens to come around the corner with check. But I don't think that's it. And this is why I think they could just come over with their queen. And then I wouldn't have the check in the corner anymore because their queen would be guarding that square. But then I could take their queen, but then they would take my queen. Oh, and I could get it with the knight. Okay. Maybe that's not so bad then. It's threatening, but it's only threatening a check. It's not threatening a mate, right? The king would just get out at that point. And I could check again, but then it would just get out. But then it would be out. I don't know. But yeah, that's not looking terribly promising. Also, my knight is hanging. So is there a way to what about this? What does that do? Nothing? They're just going to put the pawn up, right? Wait. I'm going to go back to the queen check. I'm going to go back to this. Okay. I said the rook could come back to block, but the rook would have to come back to block, right? That's the only move. Then this check. Bishop to g5. Because then the rook can't come up to block. No other pieces can block that check, so the king has to move, and I'll take... Yeah, that's it. Okay. Almost missed it. Yeah. Oh, it's going to block with the pawn first, but then the king has to move, and that's mate. Oh, I almost missed that. My goodness. But I had to look at all the checks and then put two of them together. I need one more point to get past the starting point of this video, and if I get it, I'm going to stop. I started off on such a wrong foot. It put me in a hole that I've been working to dig myself out of. Okay, I could take their queen, but that would just undouble their pawns. Don't know what I would have at that point. I don't think I would have much. So let's look at checks. I have a check with this pawn. I like that though. I also have a check with my queen. I think those are the only two checks that I have. Well, I mean, taking their queen is a check also. I don't know what order to consider these in. This check, I think their king just goes back one. Oh, but if it did, I could then check with this pawn, protected by my queen. But no, then they would just take it. So that check doesn't look that good because the king just gets out. So what about this pawn check? They would have a couple of choices. They can't come forward because my king guards those squares. So one of choice would be for the king to move back after e2, e3 check. The king could move back to g5, but then I would check here with f4, and I would definitely win their queen at that point. The other choice besides the king moving would be for the queen to capture. But if the queen captured on e3 to avoid that check, then I would capture back with my queen, and that would be mate. So that's got to be it. Okay, it did go that way. Now I just move this pawn and win their queen, right? And it doesn't matter where the king goes at that point. If the queen takes, I would just take back with my pawn, and it would still be check, and the king, I think, would take, and I would still have a queen left. So I think it has to be this. If the king goes somewhere else, I just take their queen. Oh, okay. Okay, well, I'm going to stop because I'm 4 points ahead of where I started after 5 puzzles. That was a little exhausting, especially the first one that I spent so long on and then missed. So thank you for watching. Hopefully some of this was helpful for you. If not, hopefully some of you made it this far, and maybe you enjoy watching a middle-aged man struggle at chess, or maybe something else, but I do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.